to track down Beaver Shaw, one of the celebrated gunner techs of the Rhodesian Air Force, and author of this excellent book, Chopper Tech, A Gunner's Reflection of Fire Force Operations in Rhodesia, which has proved extremely popular, and a lot of Beaver stories are in there, but he can help tell us more about what I think was arguably one of the great small air forces of the world. This is a force that operated with some obsolete equipment, very little state of the art, but punched way above its weight, thanks to some brilliant pilots who were superb under fire, incredible map readers, and backed up by technicians who were in a class of their own, and their record of keeping aircraft flying under the most adverse conditions is a lesson for any aviator anywhere in the world, I believe. Beaver, welcome.
Thank you.
And I know you don't like talking about yourself, but just tell us a little bit about where it all started, where you were born, and your journey to the Air Force.
Okay, Hannes, yeah. Well, I'm sitting here today on behalf of all the guys on the 7th Squadron. I went to Fort Victoria High School. My father lived in Fort Vic, and he was worked for the veterinary department, and I went to school in the Lowveld and spent lots of my time in the Rhodesian bush as a kid, running around just like most of the other guys that you've interviewed before. I come from third generation pioneer stock. My father was in the SAS in Malaya with General Wars and Reed Daly, and my grandfather fought in the First World War in a few of the battles, and he was with the South African infantry, and in one of the battles there were 5,000 South Africans, and I think 400 of them came out, and when the war ended, they were repatriated to Cape Town, and Grandad decided that he never wanted to know anything about war again, handed in all his medals, and he walked from Cape Town back to Rhodesia because he wanted to think about war. After school, I joined Julie's as a motor car mechanic apprentice, and I did about a year as a motor mech appy in Bulawayo Tech College. And while I was in Tech College, there was an advert saying, join the Rhodesian Air Force and you'll get paid $125 a month. In those days, I earned $14.15 a week salary, so I thought this would be quite a big boost to my income. So instead of closing down my apprenticeship and everything, I snuck away from Tech College. I had no money at all. I managed to get to Gwella. I got to Gwella and I went to just outside the Gwella police station, and I needed to phone my folks for some money to try and get me to Salisbury for the interview. And when I got to the little telephone booth, I put some money in and I tried to call them. There was no answer, and I was getting frustrated because I was running out of money, and there's a button B where you can get pushed to get your money back in, and I pushed button B and a whole lot of money came out. And I carried on pushing button B until I finished. I emptied the whole telephone out, and that got me. I never needed to phone my folks or anything, and that got me to Salisbury, where I was put into RLR barracks for a couple of nights, and I went through my interview with the Air Force, passed it, and I joined the Air Force without resigning from Julie's, which got me into a lot of trouble later, but the Air Force managed to smooth things over. So yeah, that was my start with the Air Force. And it was one of the most fantastic experiences of anybody's life.
You started on jet engines.
I started off in ERS, overhauling Avon 1 engines, And then I got transferred to another section where I overhauled Goblin engines for the Vampires.
Right.
And yeah, there was good days. It was in the early 70s, before the war really got off, and it was a wonderful life in Rhodesia.
Yes.
Those days before the war, and when Rhodesia was still going into the war, you couldn't beat the life.
Yeah.
It's pretty much like Kenya.
And you did 5 years initially. You had a 5-year contract.
Yes, and then after ERS, I got posted to 6th Squadron. Which was in Gwillow, Thornhill, and on Provost.
Provost, right.
Yes, and I went through two PTCs, and both, basically all the pilots that we trained, that we helped train as engineers, saw them go through their pilot training, ended up on 7th Squadron with us. So it was great, and there were some fantastic people. I have utmost respect for them.
Beaver, you went on to 7th Squadron after your first 5-year contract expired.
Yes, what happened is, after as my contract was coming up, I was going to leave, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do. Everybody was going to South Africa. We couldn't go anywhere with our passports in those days anyway, so I was a bit stuck as to what to do. And one of our warrant officers, a guy called Jim Ritchie, convinced me to stay on in the Air Force. And I went and did an engine airframe course, writing civvy exams and stuff to get us qualified after we left the Air Force, which was really great. And then while we were doing our course, Forster, there were South Africans assisting. There were South Africans assisting the Rhodesians at that time with helicopters, with the South African police, under the label of Polo.
Right.
Forster pulled when Forster and Kissinger put pressure on Ian Smith. They pulled all their crew, their helicopter crews and personnel out overnight. They basically arrived in aircraft, C-130s, I think, put them in the aircraft and left. They left their toolboxes and everything right where they were working with the aircraft. And we just finished our course, and a guy called Rob Bloomers came to us and asked us if we wanted to, any of us wanted to go into 7th Squadron. I mean, it was every young airman's dream to be on 7th Squadron, but there was no chance of us getting on there because you had to at least have done 7 years in 5 to 7 years in the Air Force, and you had to have lots of experience, and you had to be a sergeant. Well, we went in as SACs, which is the same equivalent as the Lance Corporal, and we did our course, and we got thrown into the bush.
Okay, Beaver, so now you're in 7th Squadron, and the war is escalating, and it's action time. Tell me about the beginning. How your first operational flight?
I think the best way to tell you is that the first bush trip that I ever did was probably one of the most action-packed of the lot. I got thrown right into the deep end. It started off by me going to air movements on a Wednesday, because every Wednesday the Fire Force would change. We normally did a 2-week stint, and Wednesday was changeover day. So I went to air movements, booked in, jumped on the deck, and when I was on the deck, I was with a colleague, Finch Belrenier, and Finch was just a little bit ahead of me, and he'd done a few bush trips, and I was sitting next to Finch, and I noticed that in front of him there was a helicopter tail rotor and a whole assembly. So being a new guy, and also knowing that I'm going to the bush and this could happen to me, I could end up having to change the tail rotor. I asked him questions. I said, "Yeah, Finch, have you changed the tail rotor before?" He sort of, "It's not that difficult, just read the book, this is what you do, it's easy." Anyway, we had a little chat there, and little did I know that this Finch incident would stick with me for the rest of my life, because what happened is we dropped Finch off at Rutenga, and the DAC carried on, and it went off to Cherezi. And when we got to Cherezi, I unpacked, wasn't sure, guys showed me where our rooms were and everything, went to my room, got everything ready, then went to the helicopter and started having a good look around the helicopter, trying to familiarize myself with the guns and everything, because everything's still new to me. And the siren went off, and everybody, the pilots ran off to the ops room, and the engineers pulled all the covers off their guns, got ready. At that time, it was actually the SAS. We were standing in as Fire Force, because RLI were going away for Christmas. RLI had done a very long stint, and they were tired, and the SAS had been in the Russian front, and Graham Wilson said that they'd stand in for a couple of weeks as Fire Force, which is not normally an SAS role. Mm-hmm. Anyway, Willie Knight came out, none of the other pilots came out, and Willie said to me, look, it's not a Fire Force call out, but you're going to have to be on your toes now. We're going to do a hot extraction type Kazovac. And jumped in the helicopter, took off, and we flew, and I'm looking, I'm wondering, where are we going to go now? And from my young days with my father in the veteran department, I knew the area very well, and I could see us going past Tweezer, Bowley, all those places, and then I saw the Gonarajo, Malapati coming up, and Palfrey Store, and all these places that I used to know. And I said to Willie, are we crossing the border? You know, I'm not allowed to cross the border.
Because you were too junior.
Yes. Yeah. So he said, well, I guess you're no longer a junior, because when you cross that border, you now got your colours. And then they come up with all their codes, G-cars going Alpha, Bravo, and I'm trying to get all these, everything's in shackle and code, and we're flying, and we get to the power lines in Mozambique. You remember the big power? We flew under the power lines because we didn't want to show ourselves, and that was like a first for me, flying under power lines, because as engineers we were always told to look out for power lines, and I'm keeping on saying power lines, and I'm thinking he's going to go up and we go under. So it was something else. And then we had a Lynx giving us Telstar, and the Lynx was relaying from the call sign. We couldn't hear the call sign, but we could hear the Lynx, and the Lynx was relaying that whatever happens, we need to be very sharp, because it's a real hot extraction. The Freddies are like
hot pursuit.
They're very close behind. They'd been tracking them these guys for 3 days. And one of the guys had got black water fever, and the guys were carrying him on his poncho. And we landed, threw him on board, and there was just...
Who were these guys?
Salute Scouts. Sorry, it was a Salute Scout call sign. There was, if I recall, 4 of them.
Right.
I saw 4 of them. And I think we actually pulled the whole call sign out, because they'd been compromised. And we flew to Palfrey Store, landed at Palfrey Store, and the medic was doing all his stuff on this guy, and he was in a real bad way. And the first time I'd ever actually seen a real Salute Scout in all his glory and smells. and I'll never forget, the Salute Scout offered me one of those big sweets that you get in the Rat Pack, those orange sweets. He gave me one of those to suck. And he was just so grateful that we pulled them out. And then we're going to head back to Cherezi, jumped in the helicopter, and it wouldn't start. And now I'm thinking,
have you done something?
I'm the one that's got to fix this. Right? And the starting cycle on a helicopter is very complicated, and it was when computers had first come out on helicopters, a thing called a mobile block. And this thing had little relays and switches all over the place, and they had a light sequence. And I was told that if you get an orange, a green, and a red, and a red, and a green, and an orange, and all these sequences meant different things. And I also knew that when things went wrong, if you just got a little screwdriver hammer and you tap different parts of the engine, selected parts of the engine would start. So I actually was flummoxed. I didn't know what the hell was going on. So I said to Willie, what was the light sequence? He's trying to think. It was an orange and a green and a red or whatever. Okay. And I jumped on top of the helicopter and I whacked on the mobile block and I whacked on the pump or whatever. And okay, try that. And the helicopter started. And of course, Willie thought I'm now, and Willie now thinks I'm the top engineer. Anyway, we got back, and there's so many things that happened at bush trip that I'll just give you a quick bracing. After that, we did a few 5-Force ops with the SAS, and I sort of got more and more comfortable how 5-Force worked. And then just before Christmas, about the 20th or the 21st of December 1975, they decided to have an HDF in the Bangala Dam area. And an HDF is when you just flood the whole area with troops, OPs all over the place, and everybody's out looking for terrorists. There was RAR and Salute Scouts all over the place looking. We were sent to Bangala Dam, where we camped at the runway at Bangala Dam, and it was really raining that night, and some SAS guys came across, and we were swapping, myself, Mario Vanucci and Rob Nelson were the engineers, the pilots were with all the officers on the other side, and we were swapping rat packs with the SAS guys and shooting shit with them and just being him. And it was really cold and wet. They had their bivvies next to us, and then we had an early night. 5 o'clock the next morning, we Salute Scouts spotted some terrorists up on the hill just above the runway where we were. We got airborne, flying around, and John Blythewood was flying K-car. Prop Keldness was there in the links with, funny enough, Graham Wilson wasn't in the K-car, he was in the links with Prop. They did some airstrikes. John had the visual, they were with Doug, John was with Doug Sinclair. They were firing at the goose, and we were flying in a wide orbit with Willie Knight, and the other G-cars also in a wide orbit. And then, it's only a helicopter. And then John spoke us onto an LZ on the side of the hill, and I had a Torty King, Steve Seymour, and Budnell, and some other guys on my helicopter. We dropped them off, and this adds to obvious.
Yeah.
And they went into an extended stop line next to a big log up on the hill. We blew off the hill and we were flying around, and I could hear John saying to them, I think they were stop 4, I think, stop 4, the looks like coming up the hill towards you, get ready. And flying around in this orbit, there was just the most, just fire all over the place, and then all I could hear on the radio is, I'm hit, and it was Torty King's call sign, and John couldn't fire. They couldn't fire at the enemy because of the thick bush, lots of gondi trees, I think, and Willie got spoken straight into the closest LZ to where the stick was, and I think they'd been taken out by an RPD gunner. They'd stood up to see what was happening, and they just in the wrong thing to do. And Willie put us down, and he said to me, "Beaver, you've got to go and help. You just go." And I jumped out the G car and I grabbed my FN and I cocked it. It wouldn't cock. It was just full of sand from dust and stuff. And he just threw me his FN, and I cocked it. It was okay, and that was it. He just blew off the sun, because obviously it was a real hot area. Now here's me with a bone dome on, flak vest on, and what the fuck? What? And I knew where the call sign was, so I started running. I just ran, and I was running like hell. And all I could hear through my helmet was just obviously my own breathing, and then just this intense gunfire. The double tap from the K car, the noise of the RPD, just and I was seeing all this dust and stuff coming in. I didn't know at the time what it was, but it was actually he was having a go at me, and I'm running with my flak vest on, and it's bumping against my chest. It's heavy as hell, and I'm just running. I'd taken a stretcher, but I tossed the stretcher, and I got to where these guys were, and they were sort of lying in a little semicircle, and you cannot believe the carnage that I saw that day. That I will never forget it for the rest of my life. They were lying on top of their guns, and there was just like plasma and stuff, and their guns were stuck with plasma. Torchy had been shot through the elbow here. Another round had gone through his eye, and he was just, I thought he was still alive. And Steve Seymour was dead. Bud didn't look too great either. And then the two of us grabbed each guy one by one, put them in their sleeping bag, on top of their sleeping bags, and we dragged them to the helicopter and got them out. So that was just intense. And going back, I think we killed 5 for the loss of all those guys. We killed 5 of the terrorists. So it was it was a tough day, and a day that I'll never forget. But there's one thing about it that I always said to Torty, that I'll always keep an eye on him.
Yeah. Because he lost that eye.
Yeah. Anyway, Torty and I were still friends to this day. And funny enough, some of Torty's cousins were on 7th Squadron with me. Pat King,
really?
Yes.
Okay.
Now after I'll just finish off with this one. After that, we got within 2 or 3 days we got called out again, and it was when Vic Cook had been shot down, when he got his Bronze Cross.
When he jumped out.
When he jumped out and shot the good these. But we can cover that in another story some other time. And Finch was shot through the side.
Okay. Okay. Beaver, I know 7th Squadron, you spent a lot of time on Fire Force operations. It's an area of great interest to a lot of people. And we've had old Don Price, who you remember, giving us the story from a soldier's point of view. It'd be nice to have you talk us through just the basic concept, how it worked for you guys in the Air Force, and some of the, I know you saw countless contacts in the course of Fire Force operations, but maybe just tell us a couple of stories that stick in your mind from that period. But, just a brief overview of the Fire Force concept from an airman's point of view.
Okay, Fire Force started off from Op Cauldron days when there was few helicopters and aircraft, but no one was really coordinated. The radio channels were different. There were many things. We made many mistakes in the beginning, but it was all a big learning curve. Basically, it evolved into a thing where you'd have a K car, which was the gunship, either armed with a 20mm cannon or a 4 Browning 303 Brownings, which was called the Dalmatian. And then there'd be between, depending on the availability of aircraft, sometimes one K car, one G car, or it could a G car was basically a slick, as the Americans call it, and a G car carried, in the early days, carried 5 troops, but the gearboxes on the helicopter couldn't handle the weight, so the gearboxes were upgraded, and we changed, and in those days it was called a brick, and then it changed to what we called a stick, and the stick consisted of 4 troops. So a 5-horse would have always have a gunship, and it would have between, say, 2 and 6 G cars. A normal 5-horse, I think, would probably consist of 1 K car and 4 G cars because of the amount of forward airfields that they operated out of. Rhodesia had forward airfields all over. We had about 8 forward airfields in Rhodesia, where 5-horse was based. And 5-horse was normally based where there was a JOC, Joint Operational Command, which was also a concept that came out of Malaya, where the army, the police, and the Air Force and all security forces would combine, and decisions would be made as a combined op.
Tell us about a typical 5-horse call-out.
Okay, sorry, I'll just add one thing. The 5-horse also had a fixed-wing complement, which was normally Cessna C337 Lynx. In the early days, it would be a Provost, but the Provost just got too old. So we replaced them with the Lynx, and the Lynx could drop. It had rockets. It had napalm, which was called Fran, and it had HE bombs, Gulf bombs, and they were pretty tooled up and very, very effective. The other complement to the 5-horse was the DC-3 Dakota that supplemented us with, because we never had enough helicopters to deploy, we would use the Dakota and would drop sticks out of the Dakota, which also worked very well. And you had to be pretty brave to be a 5-horse troopie jumping out of ducks, because the normal operational height of jumping in a hot into a hot LZ would be between 300 and 400 feet. And sometimes I think even the guys that jump from even lower. So yes, it was something.
Just talk us through a typical call-out.
Okay,
scenario.
what would happen? What would happen? There'd just be a normal day at the FAF. Start off with the RLI going for a run, or the RAR going for. They'd run in sticks and sing while they were singing. Normally singing abusive stuff to the blue jobs because their accommodation wasn't as plush as ours, and that was always a bone of contention. I still think the police had better accommodation than everybody, but that's room for debate there. Anyway, it would start off with them going for their morning run. We, at that time, first light, we would push the helicopters out of revetments. We had them in we had revetments made out of 44-gallon drums filled with soil, with big gum poles above, and wire mesh to stop the mortar bombs from actually, if you were mortared and a mortar bomb came over where the helicopter was parked, the fins would catch in the mesh. That was the idea, and apparently it worked pretty good. Anyway, we'd push the helicopters out the revetments. The helicopters were always ready to go. They were fully fueled, fully armed, and they'd be pushed into their lines next to the revetments, and everybody would continue their normal day, whatever the troops would do, whatever training they needed to do, or we would do servicing, and the pilots would be playing cards or whatever. And then the surrounding areas would be If it was a frozen area, there'd be Salute scouts in the area, no other military personnel, and they'd be based they'd either be patrolling or they'd be in observation posts looking for any terrorist activity. Which most fire force call-outs were to feedings. So fire force call-outs were either very early in the morning or at lunchtime, or sometimes in the evening, but that was a problem because everything revolved around light. The OPs would be looking out, and as soon as they saw lots of women with food on their heads and stuff, and plates and stuff, they'd normally go into thick riverine areas, and most fire force activities were next to a village, or next to a river, or next to a big copy line. And it actually became quite easy to look for them because you just look for path patterns going into the bush. And anyway, the Salute scouts would see all this, or the RAR or independent company, whoever was doing the OP would spot the gooks. They'd call fire force, they'd tell fire force that the amount of terrorists they've got visual, what clothing they're wearing, what weapons they're wearing, what the local population are doing. They'd give them as much information as they could, and then this info would go to ComOps would make the call, and once the call had been made, the hooter would go, the siren would go, which was always the worst thing in your life because you could never prepare yourself for it. It was always like that big adrenaline rush when the hooter went. For us engineer techs, we'd run to our helicopters, we'd pull all the covers off. Once the ComOps had approved the call out, the siren would go. The pilots would run to the ops room for whatever briefing they could get. Sometimes there was no time for briefing, and ops room would say, "We'll brief you while you're airborne," depending on the severity. Sometimes it could be a hot extraction, or the troops on the ground are in a contact already. So it was very flexible. Anyway, the pilots would go for the briefing. We'd prepare the helicopters, and normally the sticks would would go to the allocated helicopters. Everybody would wait. The pilot and the sticks would jump into the aircraft, and I'd walk around, do the startup, and then KK would call and do a radio check on all the aircraft, and we'd blow off as quickly as we could. There was no time for even having a wee or anything. You had to go. When it was time to go, you were gone. There was no delay. Because they were so heavy, we'd normally do a running takeoff on the runway with the nose wheel on the ground, trying to get translational lift, get airborne, and KK leading, and everybody behind KK. Once the fire force was deployed, that's the helicopters, the gunships, and the Lynx. The Lynx would act as Telstar, and he would call on ahead and make comms with the call sign on the ground and get as much information as he could and relay it to KK. And the GCARs would just listen in and get as much information as they could. On board the helicopters, the stick leaders had a headset, so they could also listen in and get a gist of what was going on, and then brief their troops whenever they had the opportunity to do so. When you were 5 minutes out, the KK would pull up, and the call sign on the ground would call him onto the target. He'd say, "Fly straight, turn left, turn right, overhead now," whatever. And he'd position the KK directly over the contact area, and our job as the engineer was to drop a huge smoke grenade the moment either we saw the terrorists on the ground, or we were over the target area. Because we always needed a reference point. So these smoke generators lasted for a long time, and you could see them in the GCARs
circling around, and it was a good. So whatever happened from then, it would be from the smoke, add 50, drop 20. The smoke was your target. The moment smoke was dropped, it was the KK gunner's job to try and knock down as much of the enemy as he could in that initial, because that's when the terrorists would bombshell, and they would normally just completely bombshell and because they'd go to a crash RV. Normally it would be on a river line, and they would go up the river line, down the river line, and we drop stops. That's where the KK Army commander there was an Army commander on KK and the KK pilot. Sometimes the Army commander didn't have much experience, so the KK pilot would run the whole scene for the Army guy. It wasn't for any other reason, but he just knew. You know, we did it so many times that we had it really tight. And then you drop stop groups around the target area to try and contain the breakout of the terrorists. The Dak would be flying around, and if required, he'd also drop his stops. Funny thing about the Daks is they used to have a stick called the wanker sticks. 2 guys on the stick were normally the 2 bad guys that had got drunk the week before, or they were under punishment. The rest of the sticks would join the firefight, and the wanker sticks had to pick up the parachutes. And it's amazing how many times the wanker sticks actually had the first contact. Anyway, it was very efficient and very fast, and it could be pretty brutal. And those RAR and RLI guys, I take my hat off to them. They were incredible. The stamina they had, just running up and down those copies and stuff in Rhodesia, it was incredible to see them in action. And the whole thing, from the KK point of view, was like a chess game. It was, I must say that in all my years on Fire Force, it was really very interesting watching how different people react to different scenarios, and our pilots were just incredible with their map reading and just how cool they were under fire.
It was a time before GPSs, and everything was on maps.
Yes, on 1 in 50 map.
Yeah.
And they used to have bags and bags of maps next to them, and they'd just sit there, and you'd watch him. He'd run his finger, he'd be flying, running, trying to run the whole scene. You have the map there, and he'd be on the ball. He'd know exactly where. Those guys were incredible. The map reading skills, and you know, those guys ended up flying as captains on major airlines and stuff. I'm very proud of them.
Yes.
Kazovacs, if somebody got shot, there was no holding back. We went in hot. I remember one time with Mark Smithdorf, we went into Matoka area. We went in, dropped our troops. As we were flaring to drop our troops, I saw about 6 terrorists lying on their backs with their AKs, just pumping rounds into our helicopter. Hit the rotor blades, came back through the cabin, and we blew out of there. I don't know how we managed to get away without being shot, because I could see the whites of their eyes. And within 5 minutes, we were back in the same LZ, picking up a Kazovac. It was incredible. For the RLI guys, we were there for you. What can I say?